No one could handle the Alpha King's pup, until a rejected Omega did the impossible. The wind carried a chill that sank into the bones, and even the bravest of hunters hesitated at the edge of these woods. Yet, the young alpha pup moved through it with a restless energy that seemed untamed by any law or caution. His fur shimmered faintly in the dim light, eyes flashing with curiosity, defiance, and a streak of wildness that few had dared confront. The Alpha King, his father, watched from the palace balcony, his gaze sharp as a blade. The young pup was more than a child. He was the heir to a kingdom under a shadowed curse. The Alpha King's rule had been hard-won, forged in the fires of ancient magic and bloodlines entwined with power beyond the mortal realm. And yet here was his son, a storm of rebellion and untamed spirit, refusing to bow to tradition, refusing to obey. Every attempt to teach him control ended in frustration, the pup's sharp teeth and claws matched only by his defiant heart. News of the pup's mischief traveled swiftly through the palace halls. Courtiers whispered in anxious tones, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "No one can handle him," they said. "Not a master, not a warrior, not even the Alpha King himself. He is a force of chaos." Beyond the palace, in the outskirts of the cursed forest, a lone figure moved with a quiet grace. The Omega, rejected by her own clan for reasons she barely understood, walked with steady purpose. Her cloak brushed the fallen leaves, and her eyes, sharp and perceptive, watched the shadows with care. She had learned to survive in solitude, relying on intuition and a rare connection to the forces that stirred beneath the surface of the world. Her clan had scorned her, dismissing her abilities and casting her aside, but she had endured. She had grown stronger because of it, not weaker. Their worlds collided one night under the light of a blood-red moon. The pup had escaped the palace grounds, drawn by some primal instinct that led him deeper into the forest than he had ever dared go. The forest, usually silent and foreboding, seemed to welcome him, bending shadows to conceal his path. But he was not alone. The Omega, drawn by whispers of danger and a sense she could not ignore, intercepted him at the edge of a clearing. The first encounter was charged with tension. The pup snarled, fur bristling, teeth bared in warning. He was the wild alpha, unbroken and fierce. The Omega, calm yet resolute, met his gaze without fear. "You don't belong out here alone," she said softly, her voice carrying authority tempered with gentleness. "The forest is not kind to those without guidance." He hesitated, taken aback by her fearlessness. No one had ever spoken to him this way. Courtiers, masters, even the Alpha King himself had met his defiance with force, yet here was someone who did not flinch. Curiosity flickered in his eyes, mingling with suspicion and caution. The Omega extended a hand, slow and deliberate. "I can help you," she said, "but you must trust me." The pup growled low in his throat, indecision rippling through his young frame. Instinct and pride battled with something unfamiliar, something like hope. He had been alone for so long, misunderstood by those who were meant to guide him. Could he truly trust this Omega, a stranger, a rejected one, whose presence seemed almost ethereal? Before he could decide, danger arrived. A shadow slithered through the trees, a predator attuned to the supernatural currents of the forest. The pup reacted instinctively, claws slashing, fangs flashing. The Omega, drawing upon her hidden abilities, stepped into the path of danger, creating a shield of light that turned the predator's attack away. Together, they moved as a team, their instincts aligning in ways that neither fully understood. After the threat passed, the pup's breathing was heavy, chest rising and falling with effort. The Omega stood before him unscathed, yet her eyes reflected the knowledge that the forest was filled with dangers unseen. "You are not alone," she said softly, "and neither am I. Together we are stronger than any force that hunts us." He looked at her, vulnerability flickering in his eyes for the first time. She had seen him as he truly was, not just a wild heir, not just a pawn of prophecy, but a young being full of fear, longing, and untapped potential. He did not move closer, but he did not retreat. The first seed of trust had been planted. The following days brought cautious exploration. The Omega showed the pup the hidden streams and secret glades of the forest, teaching him to move silently, to observe, to listen. She did not command, she guided. Slowly he began to respond, his wild nature tempered not by force but by patience and understanding. He tested her limits as any alpha would, yet every challenge was met with calm resilience. He was learning that strength alone was not enough, that trust and connection were equally powerful. Word of their growing bond reached the palace, and the Alpha King's concern deepened. He summoned the Omega to the throne room, his eyes assessing her with the weight of a ruler accustomed to reading hearts and intentions. "You have tamed my son," he said, voice deep and deliberate. "Or perhaps he has chosen to follow you." The Omega met his gaze steadily. "I do not seek to tame him," she replied. "I seek only to guide him, to help him understand his own strength. That is what he needs, not fear or force." The Alpha King studied her in silence. She was no ordinary Omega. Her presence carried power and wisdom that went beyond her years. He could sense it in the way the pup responded to her, the way his wild spirit bent just slightly, not broken, but aligned. The king's heart, long burdened with duty and regret, felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this rejected Omega could achieve what no one else could, bring balance to his heir and through him to the kingdom itself. Yet the peace was fragile. Whispers of ancient curses and prophecies lingered in the air. The pup, though beginning to trust, remained unpredictable. The forest itself seemed to hum with anticipation, as if aware that this bond was only the first step in a story far greater than any of them could yet imagine. One evening, under a sky streaked with crimson and violet, the pup led the Omega to a hidden clearing. At its center stood the ruins of a temple long abandoned, its stones etched with runes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The air was thick with magic, old and potent, and the Omega sensed the significance of the place immediately. "This is why you brought me here," she said softly, her voice carrying awe and caution. "The forest, it spoke to you." The pup lowered his head, ears flicking. He could not speak in words, yet his intent was clear. The clearing, the temple, the ancient energy, they all called to him and through him to her. They stepped forward together, cautious but united, their presence awakening the dormant power within the ruins. A sudden wind swept through the clearing, and the runes glowed brighter. Shadows twisted and stretched, forming shapes that whispered secrets of old curses and forgotten kings. The Omega felt a chill of recognition. This place was part of a prophecy, a vision that had haunted the elders of the kingdom for generations. Only one bond, forged in trust and courage, could awaken its power and prevent disaster. The pup's eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of fear, defiance, and something deeper, something like destiny. She reached out, placing her hand lightly on his shoulder. "We will face this together," she said. "No matter what comes, we are stronger united." The wind howled, carrying whispers that seemed almost human. "The rejected shall rise, the untamed shall follow, or the kingdom shall fall." The pup growled low, a sound both warning and questioning. He was the untamed heir, fierce and wild, yet he felt a pull toward the Omega, a connection that transcended fear and instinct. He could not yet understand it fully, but he knew that with her, he felt a strength he had never known, a courage that could face the unknown. As the moon rose high, casting silver light across the ancient stones, the Omega and the pup stood side by side, ready to face whatever the prophecy had set in motion. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the kingdom awaited, and their journey, fraught with danger, trust, and the stirrings of an impossible bond, had only just begun. Cliffhanger. A shadow flickered at the edge of the clearing, unseen by the pair. A voice, cold and whispering, carried on the wind. "No one can escape what is written, not even the untamed." The pup's fur bristled, and the Omega tightened her grip on his shoulder. The true test of trust, courage, and love was yet to come. The palace was silent under the moonlight, its towering spires casting long shadows across the cold stone courtyard. Within its walls, life moved like a river with hidden currents, politics, power, and pride flowing together in ways that could crush even the strongest of hearts. The pup, once untamable in the forest, now paced through the halls with restless energy. He was a storm contained only by his own curiosity and fear, and no one dared approach him without trembling. The Omega, her steps soft but determined, followed at a distance. She had been summoned to the palace by the Alpha King himself, who, despite his imposing presence, had begun to sense the unusual bond forming between her and his son. He watched her carefully, noting the way she did not flinch before the pup's snarls or the way her eyes met his with a quiet certainty. She was different, and he could not yet decide whether she was a blessing or a threat. The first days in the palace were a trial of patience. The pup resisted every command, growled at every noble who dared approach, and retreated into the shadows whenever the court's judgmental eyes fell upon him. The Omega, however, did not retreat. She stayed near him, speaking in low, gentle tones, offering small gestures of understanding. When he snarled, she did not respond with anger. When he lunged, she did not run. Slowly, her calmness began to intrigue him, stirring curiosity where once there had been only defiance. In the evenings, she wandered the palace gardens, seeking quiet spaces where she could think. The night air smelled of jasmine and earth, the moon painting silver upon the leaves. It was here that she first noticed the subtle signs of the kingdom's unrest. Whispered conversations between courtiers, the nervous glances of guards, and the tension that hung heavy in the air, all suggested that the kingdom feared more than just a wild pup. They feared what his untamed heart might unleash, and some even feared the bond that had begun to form between him and the Omega. One evening, the pup followed her into the garden, his steps hesitant, ears twitching at every sound. He did not speak, and neither did she. Yet a quiet understanding passed between them, a language beyond words, where trust began to take root. The pup nuzzled her hand, a small act that startled her with its tenderness. She knew then that he was beginning to accept her in a way no one else had ever been able to. But peace was fragile, and it was not long before the shadows of the past crept into the present. In the deep halls of the palace, hidden behind tapestries and locked doors, the Omega discovered clues to her own history. Letters, journals, and whispered confessions revealed that her rejection from her clan had not been natural or deserved. She had been cast out by a rival leader, jealous of her latent powers and the unique strength that ran through her bloodline. The revelation was bitter, yet it ignited a fire within her, a determination to claim her own place in a world that had once denied her. The pup sensed the shift in her, and for the first time he watched her with awe rather than suspicion. He began to mirror her emotions, softening when she softened, becoming more cautious when she tread carefully. Their connection deepened, forming a bond that neither fully understood yet both could not deny. The Alpha King, ever watchful, observed these moments with a mixture of relief and caution. He had long feared that his son's wild nature would bring ruin upon the kingdom, yet here was an Omega, rejected, underestimated, and untrained by human standards, who seemed to possess the ability to reach him in ways no one else could. The king's instincts warned him of danger. Prophecies were not easily overturned, and power could corrupt even the noblest of intentions. As they navigated the treacherous currents of the court, political intrigue began to surface. Nobles whispered behind closed doors, doubting the Omega's worth and questioning the Alpha's judgment. Some feared that her influence over the pup might destabilize the line of succession. Others envied her strength and the unique bond she shared with the young Alpha. Each day brought new challenges, subtle insults, veiled threats, and tests of loyalty that weighed heavily on both the Omega and the pup. It was during one of these trials that a shadow from the past emerged. The sorcerer, a figure of dark legend banished long ago for his dangerous ambitions, returned with a silent fury. His presence was felt before it was seen, candles extinguished, shadows stretched unnaturally, and the very air seemed to shiver. He sought the Alpha line, believing that its untamed power could be harnessed for his own dark designs. The court, unprepared for his return, panicked. The pup, sensing immediate danger, reacted instinctively. The first encounter was brutal yet swift. The sorcerer's magic surged through the palace halls, knocking guards aside and turning the air to ice. The pup lunged forward, his claws and fangs a blur, yet the sorcerer moved with unnatural precision, evading every strike. The Omega, though terrified, did not hesitate. She drew upon her latent powers, reaching into the energy that had always set her apart, and struck the sorcerer with a force that stunned him momentarily. The Alpha King watched, torn between pride and fear. Pride for the courage of the Omega and the growing strength of his son. Fear for what such powers might awaken in the wrong hands, and whether the prophecy could indeed be fulfilled without destroying them all. After the confrontation, the pup retreated to the highest tower, his chest heaving, fur bristling, and eyes glimmering with an emotion he did not yet understand. The Omega followed, climbing the narrow spiral stairs until she stood before him, trembling yet resolute. "You don't have to face everything alone," she said softly, her voice carrying through the chill air. "I won't leave you." The pup's ears twitched. He wanted to growl, to push her away, yet the truth in her words struck something deep within him. A longing for trust, for connection, for a bond that had never existed before. But before he could respond, the sorcerer's shadow loomed again, whispered through the corridors like a cold wind. "Your Omega is bound to me, not you," the voice hissed, and the words sliced through the young Alpha's confidence like a knife. She was never free. The pup froze, his body rigid, fur standing on end. Doubt and fear coursed through him for the first time. Could he truly protect her? Could their bond survive a force so dark and relentless? He looked at the Omega, whose calm eyes now reflected the danger she had so bravely faced, and felt a shiver of uncertainty. The night deepened, and the palace seemed to hold its breath. Courtiers peered from behind doors, sensing the tension but unable to understand it. The bond between Omega and pup, fragile and untested, was now under siege. The young Alpha's heart, untamed and fierce, had never felt such vulnerability, and the Omega, steady and courageous, faced the realization that love and trust were not shields against darkness. They were challenges to be tested. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the pup and the Omega stood together at the edge of the palace balcony, the wind whipping around them. Below, the kingdom slept, unaware of the storm brewing within its walls. He glanced at her, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Could they face the sorcerer together, or would the darkness tear them apart before they even had a chance? The Omega, sensing his fear and his uncertainty, reached for his hand, a quiet gesture that carried more weight than any words. The pup hesitated, then allowed her touch, feeling a warmth that anchored him against the swirling shadows. It was a fragile trust, a first step toward something neither had expected, and yet it was enough to give them hope. But even as they held onto each other, a chill wind passed through the balcony, carrying a whisper that made the hair on the pup's back stand on end. The sorcerer's promise had not been idle. The prophecy, the palace, and their own hearts were now entwined in a dangerous dance, and the question of who would emerge unbroken remained unanswered. Cliffhanger, the Omega felt a tremor in the ground, followed by a flicker of unnatural darkness across the horizon. She turned to the pup, her voice firm yet trembling. "He's coming. And this time, he won't wait for mistakes." The pup's eyes narrowed, the wild storm inside him awakening fully, and together they knew the next confrontation would test not only their strength but the bond that had begun to define them both. The kingdom lay under a gray dawn, the mist clinging to the towers and winding streets like a restless spirit. Inside the palace, the air was thick with tension. Guards stood silently at their posts, eyes darting to shadows that seemed to shift unnaturally. The young Alpha, once a storm of uncontrolled energy, now moved with a purposeful intensity. His fur, sleek and bristling with resolve, reflected the fire growing within him, the fire to protect, to reclaim, and to face the darkness that threatened everything he held dear. The Omega stood at his side, calm yet alert. She had spent hours the night before studying ancient scrolls and consulting the forest spirits, seeking the knowledge to face the sorcerer and the curse he carried. Her voice was steady, her hands unshaking, yet her heart raced with anticipation and fear. She knew this confrontation would demand everything of them: courage, trust, and a willingness to face truths they had long denied. The Alpha King observed from the throne room, his presence imposing but quiet. He had seen his son grow from a wild, untamable pup into a young alpha, beginning to understand the weight of leadership and loyalty. The bond between his son and the Omega, once a cause for concern, now offered the only hope to save the kingdom from the sorcerer's grasp. Even the Alpha King could not deny the strength and courage of the Omega. As the sun rose, casting pale gold across the stone walls, a tremor shook the palace. The doors to the main hall burst open, and a shadow swept through the corridors. The sorcerer had returned, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light, his cloak billowing like smoke caught in the wind. He radiated power that was both terrifying and mesmerizing, and the Alpha knew this was no ordinary enemy. "You dare defy me," the sorcerer hissed, his voice like ice scraping across stone. "Your Omega belongs to me. Your line, your kingdom, your fate, they are mine to command." The pup stepped forward, muscles tensed, claws flexing as his growl resonated through the hall. The Omega moved beside him, hand lightly touching his shoulder, grounding him. Together, they formed a silent but powerful alliance, their trust evident in the unspoken rhythm of their movements. The battle began in a flurry of shadow and light. The sorcerer wielded dark magic with frightening skill, hurling bolts of energy that shattered stone and sent guards scrambling. The young Alpha lunged, his speed and strength amplified by the bond he shared with the Omega. She called upon her own power, creating shields of light that bent the sorcerer's attacks away from them. Their teamwork was instinctive, a dance honed by nights of growing trust and understanding. Even as the sorcerer pressed forward, the pup began to realize that strength alone would not defeat him. It was not only physical force that could win this battle, it was heart, courage, and the acceptance of his own vulnerability. He paused, breathing heavily, meeting the Omega's eyes. She nodded, a silent encouragement, and he understood. To protect her, he must embrace the full power of his heart, including the parts he had long resisted: fear, love, and hope. The sorcerer laughed, sensing hesitation. "Even now you doubt yourself. You are nothing without fear. You cannot protect what is not yours." The pup growled, a deep, resonant sound that shook the hall. He stepped forward, not in anger but in clarity. His gaze locked onto the Omega, and for the first time he fully acknowledged his feelings, his trust, and his willingness to fight not just for himself, but for her, for their bond, and for the kingdom. Energy surged through him, wild and controlled all at once. The sorcerer faltered, taken aback by the sudden force of connection and courage emanating from the pair. The Omega extended her hands, drawing upon the energy that had always been a part of her, connecting with the pup's newfound strength. Light intertwined with shadow as their powers combined, creating a radiant force that enveloped the sorcerer. He struggled, his control slipping, his dark magic faltering against the pure bond of trust and love that now stood before him. "You cannot claim her," the pup said, voice steady and commanding. She chooses her own path, and I choose to protect her." The sorcerer's eyes widened in disbelief. No one had ever resisted him so completely, and the raw, unyielding strength of love and trust was more powerful than any spell or curse he had ever wielded. With a final surge of light and energy, the Omega and the pup forced the sorcerer back, breaking the chains of darkness that had threatened the kingdom for so long. He vanished in a swirl of shadow and smoke, leaving behind only a faint echo of his laughter, a warning that darkness would always seek a way back. In the stillness that followed, the Alpha King stepped forward, his eyes reflecting both relief and pride. He looked at his son, standing tall and resolute beside the Omega, and finally understood the depth of their bond. The kingdom, once filled with fear of the young pup's untamed spirit, now saw a future shaped by courage, trust, and love. The pup, panting but triumphant, turned to the Omega. His fur had lost none of its wildness, but his eyes glimmered with something new, understanding, acceptance, and the beginnings of hope. She smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and took his hand in hers. In that simple gesture, all doubts, fears, and trials melted into a shared moment of victory and connection. Yet, the palace remained wary. The echoes of the past lingered in the corridors, reminding them that peace was never permanent. The Alpha King, though relieved, remained vigilant, aware that the forces that sought to claim the Alpha line might return. The pup and the Omega, however, understood that together they could face whatever shadows emerged. Their bond, forged in trials and strengthened by love, had become a force beyond magic, prophecy, or power. Days turned into weeks, and life in the palace slowly returned to a rhythm. The pup, once feared and misunderstood, now moved through the halls with confidence tempered by wisdom. He trained with his father, learning not just strength but patience, strategy, and leadership. The Omega became an integral part of the palace, not as a courtier to be feared or envied, but as a guide, a partner, and a protector of the young Alpha. In the quiet moments, away from the eyes of the court, the pup and the Omega would wander the palace gardens. The moon would rise, silver light cascading over leaves and fountains, and they would speak softly of dreams, fears, and the life they were building together. Every shared laugh, every gentle touch, and every glance carried the weight of their trials and the joy of survival. They were no longer alone, no longer rejected, no longer defined by the limitations others had imposed upon them. The kingdom, too, began to change. The people whispered of the pair who had faced darkness together, of the courage of the rejected Omega, and of the untamed Alpha who had grown into a leader of strength and compassion. The court, once rigid and skeptical, began to accept that tradition could be reshaped by courage and heart. And yet, even in victory, they remained vigilant. Shadows lingered at the edges of the forest, faint reminders that the sorcerer's influence had not been entirely erased. The Omega and the pup stood together, knowing that the bond they had forged, strong, unbreakable, and tempered by trust, was the only shield against the darkness that would inevitably return. One night, as the moon rose full and bright over the palace, the pup turned to the Omega, his eyes reflecting the silver light. "I was afraid," he admitted quietly, "afraid I could never be enough to protect you, to protect this kingdom." The Omega reached up, brushing her hand against his cheek. "You were always enough," she said softly. "Strength isn't just power, it's trust, courage, choosing to stand even when fear is strong. And you've chosen every day." He leaned into her touch, a soundless sigh of relief and love escaping him. For the first time, the wildness inside him felt balanced, a storm tempered by understanding and connection. Together they gazed over the kingdom, aware of the weight of responsibility but strengthened by the certainty of each other's presence. The Alpha King, watching from his chamber above, allowed himself a rare smile. The kingdom was safe for now. The prophecy had been fulfilled in ways he had never imagined, not through fear, obedience, or brute strength, but through courage, love, and the impossible bond between a rejected Omega and the Alpha King's once untamable pup. And as the moonlight bathed the palace in silver, the pup and the Omega stood side by side, ready to face whatever shadows might return. Their hearts were bound, their trust unbreakable, and their story, a tale of redemption, courage, and love, was only beginning.